And welcome back to Live Impact News here on the 13 News Now app. We embark on our third interview of the day today. We welcome Dr. Jane Baldwin to the stream, an assistant professor of Earth System Science at the University of California, Irvine. And Dr. Baldwin, I'm Connor. It's wonderful to meet you. Thanks for taking a little bit of time to do this with us here.
Sure, happy to be here.
Now, Dr. Baldwin, you are in California. I am told that California has more of a dry heat. Where us here in Hampton Roads, we are very used to that humidity. And so this topic that we are about to dive in on, it feels especially pertinent to us. I don't want to discount you from those who are affected by humidity. How is it out there in California right now?
It's certainly not as bad as it is in Virginia right now. I have most of my dad's side of the family actually is in the Norfolk, Virginia area, and they were texting me about how hot and humid it was. So, definitely feeling for you guys more than myself right now.
Oh, this is great. Okay, well, at some point, you'll have to tell your dad to please watch 13 News Now. You know, he may be able to see Dr. Baldwin on TV. That's great. That's awesome to hear that you got connections back here on the coast. And that humidity over the course of the last 2 weeks has been extreme. You know, I think when we talk about climate change, maybe we've all gotten more educated and nuanced on what that means. But for a long time, it was just climate change equals more hot. And not necessarily, that's a little bit reductive as to what's actually happening here. We know that climate change impacts a number of different aspects of weather and climate, including, of course, humidity. How does a changing climate impact humidity levels?
Well, as we burn more fossil fuels, that increases concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and leads the overall temperature of the Earth to be hotter. When the temperature is hotter, it basically allows the atmosphere to hold more moisture. It's altering the equilibrium of water between a liquid and vapor state. So, in short, this leads metrics of humidity like absolute and specific humidity to increase. Something that's important to keep in mind that's a little nuanced is that relative humidity, which is the amount of moisture in the atmosphere compared to the maximum amount the atmosphere can hold, is expected to remain approximately constant. But nonetheless, the total amount of moisture in the atmosphere that makes it feel muggy is going to increase overall with climate change and has been increasing.
And is that something where the areas that experience high humidity, like we said, that mid-Atlantic region down into Florida, will those areas just experience that increase, or maybe will this, affect some of those drier, hotter areas, California, Arizona? Will there be noticeable increases in humidity in those areas as well, where maybe Virginia starts to feel like a full-on swamp, but then California starts to feel a little bit like Virginia used to feel? I hope that question makes sense. Will we see some of that?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. So, overall, we definitely do expect the total amount of moisture in the atmosphere to be increasing everywhere. However, the details about how that might manifest across space are still being worked out. The fundamental thermodynamic relationship that underlies this is something called the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship. And basically, when temperature increases, initially it leads to relatively small increases in humidity. But as the level of humidity and temperature increases, it leads to larger increases in humidity. So, what that all means is we have a bit of an expectation that a place like Virginia might see bigger humidity increases than a place like Arizona. But candidly, there's still a lot climate scientists are trying to understand about differences between expectations from what we observe on the ground, what our models predict, et cetera. So I think over the next few years, hopefully we'll learn a lot more about those spatial variations and changes in humidity that really matter for impacts on the ground.
Okay, so still learning, still observing how this phenomena will sort of evolve over time. I'm wondering when it comes to humidity specifically, how does that impact other types of weather? I guess a better way to put this is, what does higher humidity levels lead to? Could that lead to an increase in storms or thunder and lightning or hurricanes or anything like that? What role does it play in those other extreme weather systems?
So when the amount of moisture in the atmosphere is higher, when humidity is higher, you can think of the atmosphere as kind of being like a sponge that's wetter. And so when a circulation system comes through like a hurricane that leads to rainfall, the amount of rainfall it's going to produce is just going to be higher. You're wringing out that sponge and it has more water in it. And so we have pretty high confidence that the amount or how intense extreme rainfall will be, regardless of what its source is, whether it's a hurricane or some other circulation feature, is going to worsen with climate change. And we've seen evidence of that already. Something that leads me to be concerned about is that the risk of seeing a dangerous compound extreme event, such as a hurricane followed by a heat wave, might be increasing as well. So we could deal with situations where people have lost power due to a hurricane or flooding, and then they're trying to cope with extreme heat, which is kind of a unprecedented potential combination of these extreme weather events.
Yeah, as you play it out down the line, it certainly, you can easily see how this could lead to a number of other crises. I'm wondering, obviously, like you said, taking steps to curtail the amount of fossil fuels going into the atmosphere is obviously sort of the foundational solution that we all look at when it comes to climate change. I'm wondering, when it comes specifically to high humidity, not just the increasing humidity that may come from climate change, but just the high humidity that certain communities experience every day, what's the best way to mitigate that? Is there any way to mitigate that that's maybe different from how you would try to handle just typical heat?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the things I like about studying heat in general is it is a type of extreme event where we do have a lot of behaviors we can do on the ground that can reduce the negative impacts of it. Most of them are typical for heat in general, regardless of if it's a dry heat or a muggy heat, but hydrating well, ensuring you're modifying your physical activity appropriately. So maybe not being a hero and going on a run outside when it's the hottest day of the year, turning on your air conditioning or fans, and also using cooling centers that a lot of neighborhoods have if maybe you don't have air conditioning at home. A more nuanced question that you asked is, well, should our how we behave be different if it's humid heat versus dry heat? And there are some types of behaviors that are more or less effective depending on how humid it is. For example, how effective fans are can vary depending on if you're dealing with a humid heat versus a dry heat. In places like Arizona, where it's really dry, they can use totally different cooling devices called swamp coolers that really don't work in a muggy environment like Virginia, where you really need to rely on standard air conditioning. So it is important to be mindful as humid heat increases, how that should maybe affect our behaviors. I think scientists are still trying to, again, work out the details of exactly how much and how quickly humid heat will be changing, especially to inform those behavioral adaptations that are really critical.
And then, beyond how we react to these things, how could elevated levels of humidity impact these natural environments where that's really settling in? I mean, is this going to radically change certain ecosystems?
That's a good question. I think um, I myself am someone who primarily studies the effect of heat on humans. There are a lot of scientists who try to think about what the effect of heat is on domesticated animals, for example, cows. Um, and of course, we expect there'll be strong effects on ecosystems. I think the unfortunate reality is, while we have relatively well-calibrated models for animals that are domesticated and people, which we observe frequently, there's less that we know about wild animals because we simply can't observe them as closely. At the same time, as we expect ecosystems or local conditions to shift, that will presumably lead different species to have more or less trouble surviving there. And that's one of the kind of more unknown risks of climate change that personally keeps me up at night. And, I really rely on my ecologist friends to try and understand that risk better.
Yeah, and it's hopefully, perhaps that could be another interview for another day here on Live Impact News. Dr. Baldwin, you're already giving us content ideas in addition to everything that you've talked about with us today. I have to finish the interview with a question that I feel like is not it is I don't think it's going to come out very smart, but I want to ask it anyway. Obviously, anytime anyone talks about humidity, the summer is the season that we all think about. I don't know that I've ever truly put any thought into how humid it is in January or November during those seasons where the temperature's just cooler anyway. Does humidity impact the temperatures during those seasons? Does it have maybe just less of an impact? Is it something that we just can't feel because the atmosphere is cooled anyway? How does humidity manifest itself in the winter, if at all?
That's a really interesting question. Definitely the thing that we can feel more easily is the effect of humidity when it's really hot out. There is some evidence that humidity in times like the winter can affect how likely respiratory diseases to spread because a lot of respiratory diseases are spreading on like droplets, kind of, it's gross, but like going from one person's mouth and nose to another person's mouth and nose. And if you think about when the humidity levels are different, that might affect how long those droplets can remain in the air. So there are human health effects of humidity in the winter. There's also interesting effects on kind of other things we like to do as humans. For example, how hot or the temperature combined with the humidity, I've learned recently, has a big impact on our ability to make snow at ski resorts. So if you're someone who likes to ski, it's not just the temperature, but it's also the humidity that might determine whether your favorite slopes you can ski on or not this upcoming winter.
Okay, Dr. Baldwin, you even managed to make that question extremely insightful and helpful and informative. We greatly appreciate your time today. Is there anything else that we need to know that you want to touch on regarding this topic?
Something I'm really excited about that my group is doing research on is trying to understand how heat is going to affect not just the worst outcomes we might cope with, like people dying in the heat, which obviously we want to avoid, but also how it might affect our day-to-day human behavior. Like, is it possible to do your chores or go for a run or play with your kid outside in the heat? I think we're over the next couple of years going to see a lot more nuanced predictions of safe physical activity in the heat, and hopefully that will help inform how society can adjust their behavior to not just survive but thrive in the heat going forward.
Okay, that's a great point. Very interesting. And, as all these things come to fruition, maybe we'll be able to talk to you again down the road. But we really appreciate you spending some time with us here today on Live Impact News.
Yeah, would love that. Thank you so much and great to meet you.
Great to meet you as well as Dr. Jane Baldwin, again, an assistant professor of Earth System Science at the University of California, Irvine, with family here in the Hampton Roads area as well, and with a lot of great insight and information into a weather phenomenon that affects us so deeply in Hampton Roads. Dr. Baldwin, we appreciate it.